Hi, my name is Cathy Hunt and I'm the executive producer of WOW in Australia. And as we come to the end of the segment of programming from Australia and the Pacific for this fabulous global WOW 24 event, I'd like to introduce everybody to our patron of WOW here, Quentin Bryce. With a rich and distinguished career as an academic, lawyer, human rights advocate, university college principal, and vice-regal representative in Queensland, Quentin was the first and so far only woman Governor-General of Australia for 5 years between 2003 and 2008. Quentin continues to contribute to major policy initiatives for women, families, and First Nation peoples. She is widely loved and admired for her intellectual vigour, her conviction, and the warmth and grace she brings to every role, qualities she energetically shares with us as patron. She is also a passionately engaged grandmother, and as you will find out in a catch-up I had with Quentin last week on the impacts of COVID-19 on elders in our community and on grandmothers in particular. I hope you enjoy the conversation.
We were going to start, as I said before, by just talking about your grandchildren, Quentin, because you often talk about them, and it would just be great for everybody to know exactly who your grandchildren are and where they are.
Well, there's nothing more a grandmother loves than to talk about her grandchildren. I remember many, many years ago when Michael and I'd go to a dinner party and, I'd walk away and say, "You didn't get stuck with that woman talking about her grandchildren all night, did you?" I turned into one overnight when my first grandchild was born. It is something that pierces your heart in a way you could never imagine. And it's a magic relationship, enormously important in the life of every grandparent. But it's something that's deeply in my heart, and what I love about my life as an elder.
And who was the first?
Well, the first, and her parents say that I've made her the chosen one, but I have to confess there is something special about the first, and that's Alexandra, whom you know, who's 20 years old at university, and we're so lucky that she spends time with us every week as a university student going down to UQ. So she's part of our lives 2 or 3 days a week. And we love having her in our household. And of course, we've missed her desperately during the last few months.
And then she was the first, and then the others.
And then there were 11 more.
11.
Yes, 11. we have 12, and they're aged from 2 to 20, and they're in and out of our house in summertime, especially to swim and splash around.
What happened to you in March when the announcement came that, in terms of COVID, that we would all be going into some form of lockdown or isolation?
Well, I was thinking about that this morning. When was that? About 3 months ago. And of course, I think we all had a sense of anxiety about the pandemic before the announcements were made about what its day-to-day impact was going to have on our lives. People over 60 were described as old people. The most vulnerable people would be old people over 60. I have to say, it's the first time I've really felt old. I'm 77 and Michael's 82. And certainly I think of myself as an elder in our society, and I love being in that role, being an elder now. Yeah. Michael and I love being Dee Dee and Pop Pop, but suddenly I felt like an old person, and one of my dear pals and I explored some of the language that's used, and we agreed on the idea that we don't like the word elderly. We don't mind old and elder, but we sort of find something rather patronising about the word elderly.
Absolutely.
But, that was a very serious thing to contemplate, that we wouldn't be able to see our grandchildren. And I know that grandparents across our country had exactly the same response, that we were thinking of ways we'd be able to help and how we could contribute to support our children and our grandchildren through what was ahead.
Yeah.
Not thinking for a moment that we wouldn't be able to see them.
Absolutely.
And particularly in our case, my husband has a very serious illness that compromises his health, so he particularly had to be protected, and our children took that on board very seriously, as all children did too. I think they felt very deeply the responsibility for not causing their parents, the grandparents, to be put at risk, and for them to take the social isolation very seriously.
Yeah.
And the implications of that have had emotional, physical, mental, so many effects. But to suddenly have taken away the absolute joyousness of Sylvie, who's running into our house down the hallway shouting out, "Pop, pop, pop, pop," and throwing herself around his neck. And
The physical.
Yes,
Yeah.
and all that means.
Yes.
And, it makes you very conscious of how important touch and feel is. So many things. The depth of the anxiety, I think, for those two generations of the grandparents, their children, and the little ones, and the worry that it came across us all, I think, to have this sense of responsibility of putting vulnerable people whom you dearly love at risk. My daughter-in-law Lucy, she's done our shopping every week, buying our food, taking it home, washing it, bringing it to us, and also keeping an eye out, making sure that we didn't do anything we shouldn't have been. And we did crack at one stage, I have to say. Yeah. We have in front of our house on the footpath a lovely green lawn, and we would put a rug out there, and the littlest ones would come and sit there, and I had a chair on the other side of the fence that luckily is iron, so you can crisscross, so you can look through it, and I'd read to the children, through the fence.
So, do you think we've learnt anything through this? If you think about what has happened to you personally, to the people that you've seen around you, to the conversations that you've had, what are your hopes and your feelings coming out of this? I mean, particularly if we think about the conversation that we're having at the moment through the global WOW conversation about the impact on women and girls of this crisis. What do you think we
I think the
may have
impact
picked
has
up?
been intense. Yes, I think that it's pulled us up, and particularly grandmothers, I think. As you get older, people assume that you have more time for things, but you actually have less time, and time is very important. So you want to spend it very wisely, and you think more deeply about the things that are very important to you. It's about clarifying priorities. It's been a time for reflection, I think, people being able to, go out and have a walk, listening to music, and thinking more deeply about what are the things that really matter. And of course, that's what bonds grandmothers around the world, wherever we are, whoever we are, what our differences might appear to be, what we all have in common, grandmothers around the world, is that our top priority is for the well-being of our children and our grandchildren, about their futures, the futures of the world that they're going into, its sustainability, its environment, its safety, their economic security. So it's been a time, I think, for clarifying a lot of these things that are so important, that in the hurly-burly of our lives that are in many ways more and more hectic and chaotic in a time of enormous change, technological change, it's had a very deep impact. We've heard a lot yet again of the word resilience. To me, a much more significant word to describe, what's at the heart of all this for us has been about reflection. And
absolutely. So what would your final message be for grandmothers and all those grandmothers in the world out there who might be listening?
Well, it's a sense of solidarity and sisterhood, I feel, with them, because I've been talking about my grandchildren, about missing the hugs, missing the joyousness, missing the lovely quiet conversations on the side with these wonderful young ones in our lives that matter so much to us. But I'm so conscious of the fact that grandmothers around the world are in just the same ways sharing these emotions, concerns, and that's highlighting, I think, emphasising the very important role that grandmothers have, of elders, and our responsibility to speak up, to support, to show leadership in our own way, in our families and in our community. And that's what grandmothers do. I've got a favourite expression, grandmothers know best. But it is about so many of the things really that wow's about. Yes. The magic that what you're doing now, all the wonderful people in WOW bringing together this great gathering on the net. Instead of what we were really planning to do around the world. It's so empowering, and it fills me with optimism. It's the power and the magic and the reassurance and the reaffirmation and the encouragement by women, for women of all ages. So I'm absolutely thrilled that this WOW is happening in 2020, that we're not going without our WOW, because it's what changes the world. Yes, my message really is about our sisterhood and the empowerment of women and the leadership of women and the coming together of them.
Particularly led by elders who are grandmothers. Thank you.
It's our job, and we love it.
Thank you, Quentin. That's great.